Welcome to Serenity and Fire, the podcast where wellness meets grit. I'm your host, Krista Guidenti, founder of Panacea Luxury Spa Boutique. Join me as we dive into the intriguing world of biohacking, clean living, cutting-edge spa trends, and the hustle, grind, and grit of entrepreneurship. From my personal battles with weight management, infertility, and the 30-year journey to create and launch my dream business, to building a sanctuary for those who have been touched by cancer, I'm here to share real talk, inspire big dreams, and spark a passion for holistic living inside each and every one of you. So let's dive in. Welcome back to Serenity and Fire. Today, we're picking back up with our peptide series, but first, I want to take you back about 15 to 20 years when the craze over growth hormone was literally everywhere. Television commercials, magazine advertisements, anti-aging clinics, weight loss centers, bodybuilding forums, celebrity interviews. The message sounded almost too good to be true. Lose fat, build muscle, recover faster, sleep better, look younger, feel younger, maybe even slow aging itself. Some people spent thousands of dollars chasing those promises. Some swore it changed their lives. Others noticed very little. Then the conversation shifted. Scientists stopped asking, should we inject growth hormone? And started asking, what if we could simply encourage the body to make more of its own growth hormone? That single question launched an entirely new category of therapies, and with it, an entirely new wave of excitement. Today, those therapies are everywhere. We have CJC 1295, ipamorelin, sermorelin, tesamorelin, and MK77, also known as ibutamorin. Some people call them growth hormone peptides, others call them secretagogues. Others lump them all together as anti-aging therapies, but they all actually work in very different ways. Some replace growth hormone, others encourage your own body to release it, and one of the most popular compounds in this entire category isn't even a peptide at all. Today, we're going to untangle all of that because before you can decide whether any of the therapies make sense for you, you have to first understand how your body regulates growth hormone in the first place. So welcome back to my peptide series. I believe this is our 5th episode in the series. And to be honest, we've kind of barely scratched the surface on all of the excitement surrounding this topic. So I'm excited to jump into this section today. But before we do that, I want to just quickly review what we've covered over the last month. We started by answering one simple question. What exactly is a peptide? Then we explored GLP-1 therapies and why they've become one of the most talked about drug classes in modern medicine. From there, we learned how to separate scientific promise from scientific proof using the Serenity and Fire peptide checklist and our promise versus proof scale. Most recently, we explored regenerative peptides like BPC 157, TB 500, and KPV. Today, we're taking the next step. We're shifting from healing peptides to growth hormone stimulating peptides. And I think this episode revolves around one question more than any other. Should we replace what the body naturally makes, or should we try to optimize what it already knows how to do? That question sits at the heart of modern longevity medicine. And by the end of today's episode, I think you'll have a much clearer understanding of why. So what is growth hormone? Well, despite its name, growth hormone isn't just about growth. And if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you've already finished growing. But your body continues producing growth hormone every single day. Why is that? Well, it's because adults still actually depend on it. Researchers believe that growth hormone plays important roles in things like repairing tissues, maintaining lean muscle, supporting bone density, stimulating collagen production, helping regulate fat metabolism, supporting exercise recovery, and coordinating many of the repair processes that occur while we sleep. So while growth hormone is technically the correct name, it might be more accurate to think of it as one of the body's repair and recovery hormones, because as adults, that's actually how our body uses it. So where does growth hormone come from? Growth hormone doesn't simply appear whenever your body decides it needs more. It's part of an incredibly sophisticated communication network that's constantly responding to what's happening throughout your body. And unlike many hormones, growth hormone isn't acting alone. Several different parts of your brain are actually working together to decide when growth hormone should be released, how much should be released, and just as importantly, when it should stop. It all begins in the small region of your brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus doesn't actually produce growth hormone. Instead, it acts more like the body's command center. It gathers information, processes what's happening throughout the body, and then sends instructions to another tiny gland sitting just beneath it called the pituitary gland. The pituitary is the structure that actually releases growth hormone into your bloodstream. So rather than thinking of growth hormone as something your pituitary simply just squirts out whenever it feels like it, it's much more accurate to think of it as a carefully coordinated conversation happening between your brain and your pituitary gland. Think of it like this. Imagine you're sitting in a concert hall. The musicians are already seated. The violinists know exactly how to play. They don't need someone to teach them the music. They're simply waiting for one thing, the conductor. The conductor decides when the violins begin, when they pause, when they become louder, and when they become softer. Your growth hormone system works in a surprisingly similar way. The hypothalamus is like the coordinator. The pituitary gland is the orchestra, and growth hormone is like the violin section. The musicians already know what to do and how to do it. They're simply waiting for the signal. And now that we understand how the metaphorical orchestra works, we can introduce something called a growth hormone secretagogue. The word sounds intimidating, but it actually is very descriptive. A secretagogue is simply something that encourages your body to release one of its own hormones. Think back to our orchestra. Injecting growth hormone is like hiring an entirely new violin section and placing them on the stage. A growth hormone secretagogue then signals the conductor to cue the violin section that's already sitting there. Your body already knows how to make growth hormone. A secretagogue simply encourages your own system to release more of it. And that brings us to one of the biggest philosophical differences we'll explore today. Are we replacing something the body normally makes, or are we encouraging the body to do what it already knows how to do? And as I mentioned in my opening, that single question lies at the heart of many of today's longevity therapies. When the conductor signals, the orchestra plays, but without the conductor, the orchestra sits quietly. And we'll come back to this orchestra analogy several times today because it perfectly illustrates the difference between replacement and optimization. So now let's meet our conductors. There are 3 primary messengers directing the performance. The first is called growth hormone releasing hormone, or GHRH. As the name suggests, its job is pretty straightforward. It tells the pituitary gland, release growth hormone. The second messenger is called somatostatin. Think of somatostatin as the braking system. When enough growth hormone has been released, or when your body doesn't need any more, somatostatin helps slow things down. Then there's ghrelin. Most people know ghrelin is the hunger hormone, and that's true, but ghrelin also encourages the release of growth hormone. So instead of having a simple on and off switch, your body is constantly balancing signals that say more, less, every hour of every day. And here's another fascinating characteristic of this system. Growth hormone isn't released continuously. It isn't like water flowing steadily through a garden hose. Instead, it's released in carefully timed pulses. A burst, then quiet. Another burst, then quiet again. Most of those larger pulses occur while you're sleeping, particularly during deep sleep. That isn't random. It's one of the ways your body coordinates repair with rest. And I want you to keep that pattern in mind because several of the therapies we'll be discussing today and in our future episodes aren't simply trying to increase growth hormone. They're trying to work with those natural rhythms instead of replacing them altogether. And that difference helps explain why scientists became interested in growth hormone secretagogues in the first place. But the story doesn't end with growth hormone. In fact, many of the benefits people attribute to growth hormone are actually carried out by another molecule working behind the scenes that is doing much of the heavy lifting. Its name is IGF-1, or insulin-like growth factor 1. Despite all the attention growth hormones receive, many of the things people credit to growth hormones aren't actually carried out by the growth hormone itself. Instead, growth hormones often act more like the first domino in a much longer chain of events. One of the biggest players in that chain, as I just mentioned, is IGF-1. Think of growth hormone as the executive who approves the project, and IGF-1 as the project manager who actually oversees much of the work. Growth hormone sends the message, IGF-1 helps carry it out. That's why physicians almost always pay attention to both growth hormone and IGF-1 when evaluating this system. So where does IGF-1 come from? When your pituitary releases growth hormone, that growth hormone travels throughout your bloodstream to many different tissues. One of the most important destinations is the liver. When the liver receives that signal, it begins producing IGF-1. IGF-1 then travels throughout the body, helping regulate many of the processes we commonly associate with growth hormone: muscle protein synthesis, bone remodeling, collagen production, cellular growth, tissue repair, and metabolism. So while growth hormone starts the conversation, IGF-1 often carries much of it forward. which is one reason physicians frequently measure IGF-1 rather than trying to measure growth hormone itself. Another reason physicians don't typically measure just growth hormone is because of the way growth hormone is released in the body. Remember when we talked about how it is released in pulses? Imagine trying to determine how much traffic passes through an intersection all day, but you're only allowed to look out the window for 5 seconds. If you happen to look during rush hour, you'll think traffic is incredibly heavy all the time. If you look at 3 o'clock in the morning, you'll think no one uses the road at all. Neither observation tells the whole story, and growth hormone works similarly. Because it's released in bursts, a single blood draw may capture a large pulse, or it may capture almost nothing at all. Neither necessarily reflects what's happening over the course of an entire day. IGF-1 is different though. Its levels are much more stable, and instead of measuring the individual waves, it's more like measuring the overall tide. That makes IGF-1 a much more practical marker for assessing how active the growth hormone system has been over time. Now, it's not perfect, no lab test ever is, but it gives clinicians a much more reliable snapshot than a single random growth hormone measurement. So if we break that down into something a little simpler, imagine your paycheck. If I asked you how much money you make in a year, but I only looked at one random day in your checking account, I probably wouldn't be able to tell very much from that. Maybe you were paid yesterday, maybe payday's tomorrow. But if I looked at your annual income, I'd have a much better understanding of your financial picture. Growth hormone is a little like checking your bank balance on a random afternoon. IGF is more like looking at your annual salary. It doesn't tell you everything, but it gives you a much better sense of what's been happening over time. So why does growth hormone decline as we age? And I think that's where today's conversation gets really interesting, because most people assume that declining growth hormone is simply yet another example of the body wearing out. But evolutionary biologists aren't convinced that that's the whole story. What if, instead of being a flaw, it's actually a trade-off? Think about childhood. During infancy, childhood, and puberty, growth hormone levels are naturally high. That makes perfect sense. Children are building bones, growing muscles, developing organs. Their bodies are in construction mode. Once adulthood arrives, the priorities begin to change. Instead of rapid growth, the body shifts towards maintenance, repair, reproduction, energy conservation, and perhaps protecting us against uncontrolled cell growth, which raises a fascinating question. If nature intentionally lowers growth hormone as we age, should we automatically assume restoring youthful levels is always beneficial? Or might there be some reasons evolution made that trade? That's not a rhetorical question, because scientists are actually actively trying to answer it. Because while higher growth hormone may improve certain aspects of body composition and recovery, chronically elevated growth hormone and IGF-1 signaling have also been associated with increased risk in certain cancers and may influence other aspects of aging. On the other hand, very low growth hormone can contribute to loss of muscle mass, reduced bone density, increased body fat, and diminished quality of life. So perhaps the goal isn't maximizing growth hormone, perhaps it's optimizing it. Notice how we're right back to the theme we introduced at the beginning of today's episode: replacement versus optimization. And again, when we go back 15 to 20 years to the growth hormone craze, growth hormone was one of the hottest topics in anti-aging medicine. Clinics appeared everywhere. Advertisements promised lose fat, build muscle, turn back the clock, look younger, feel younger, recover faster. And for some people, those promises seemed to come true, while others spent thousands of dollars and experienced very little benefit. So what happened? Was growth hormone overhyped, or was it simply misunderstood? The answer is probably a little bit of both. Growth hormone isn't magic. It doesn't override poor nutrition. It doesn't replace resistance training. It doesn't compensate for inadequate sleep. It doesn't eliminate insulin resistance. And it certainly doesn't erase the natural biology of aging. Like almost every therapy we've ever discussed, and especially throughout this series, it works within the larger context of the entire human body. That's one reason results varied so dramatically with human growth hormone. Some individuals truly had deficiencies, others didn't. Some optimized everything else alongside treatment, while others expected growth hormone to do all the work for them. Those are very different situations, and HGH absolutely works. In fact, it's one of the most effective treatments we have for people who are truly growth hormone deficient. That's never really been in dispute. So for children, adults with pituitary disease, brain tumors, head trauma, and certain genetic disorders, these patients often experience dramatic improvements, and HGH is still standard medical therapy for those conditions today. No controversy about that. But healthy people wanted the same results, and this is where the anti-aging clinics entered and the marketing became feverishly exciting. Unfortunately, many of those promises that were advertised were often exaggerated. Yes, some people absolutely benefited and others not so much. Why? Well, it's because they weren't actually deficient. They were trying to optimize something that wasn't necessarily broken. So at first glance, it almost looked as though the excitement surrounding growth hormone was beginning to fade. And I'll admit, when GLP-1s hit the market and those medications really exploded onto the scene, I assumed history was about to repeat itself. I remember thinking, here we go again, another therapy making enormous promises, another wave of excitement, another trend that probably won't live up to the headlines. But that's not what happened, as we all know. Instead, millions of people began losing life-changing amounts of weight that were not only statistically significant, they were visually undeniable. The results weren't just impressive on paper. Families, friends, physicians could all see these impressive results. And that immediately forced us to ask why GLP-1 therapies were producing such dramatic and consistent weight loss results, while growth hormone therapies produced much more variable outcomes. The answer really comes back to biology. Growth hormone was never designed to be a powerful weight loss hormone. It certainly influences body composition, and it can help preserve lean muscle, it affects fat metabolism, and it contributes to recovery. But obesity is driven by far more than growth hormone. It's influenced by appetite, satiety, food reward pathways, insulin, glucagon, gut hormones, food cravings, energy expenditure, and dozens of other biological systems. GLP-1 just so happens to influence many of those systems simultaneously. Growth hormone does not. And that's one of the reasons the two stories unfolded so differently. It's not that one therapy is necessarily better, they're solving entirely different biological problems. Expecting growth hormone to produce GLP-1 like weight loss is a little like expecting a blood pressure medication to treat depression. Both are medications, but they're addressing completely different physiology. So why didn't scientists stop pursuing growth hormone? The answer to that is because growth hormone works remarkably well for people who truly have growth hormone deficiencies. And as I just mentioned, that's still well-established medicine today. Instead, researchers began asking a different question. Not does growth hormone work for things like weight loss, but is replacing growth hormone the smartest way to influence this system? Or is there a more physiologic way to accomplish similar goals? Remember, your body doesn't normally keep growth hormone elevated all day long. It releases it in carefully timed pulses. So researchers became curious. Instead of bypassing the body's natural communication system, could they work with it? Could they encourage the pituitary gland to release growth hormone in a way that more closely resembles normal physiology? And that curiosity is what gave rise to an entirely new category of therapies, growth hormone secretagogues. And now we finally have enough background to understand what they are, how they differ from one another, and why they may represent a fundamentally different approach than simply injecting growth hormone. With this new group of therapies, scientists have found that some stimulate GHRH, some stimulate ghrelin pathways, and some do both. That said, today, we learned how your body actually regulates growth hormone, why that system changes with age, why growth hormone isn't simply a muscle-building hormone, and why researchers eventually began asking whether working with the body's natural signaling might be more physiologic than simply replacing it. And now the real fun begins, because in our next episode, we're going to put all of that physiology to work. We'll finally answer questions like, what exactly is CJC 1295? Why is ipamorelin so commonly paired with it? What's the difference between sermorelin and tesamorelin? Why is MK677, which is also called ibutamoren, not actually a peptide at all? And perhaps more importantly, which of these therapies has the strongest scientific evidence, which still raises important questions, and where do they all land on our promise versus proof scale? Understanding how your body works is only the first step. Next time, we'll explore the tools that are trying to influence it. So as we close out today's episode, please remember that everything shared on Serenity and Fire is meant for general education and inspiration purposes only. The topics we discuss are not intended to diagnose, treat, or replace personalized medical care. So please always consult with your healthcare provider regarding your individual health concerns, laboratory results, medications, and treatment decisions before trying anything we talk about on the show. Your health is unique and your care should be too. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to Serenity and Fire. If today's episode helped you better understand how your body naturally regulates growth hormone and gave you a stronger foundation for evaluating the therapies we'll discuss next time, please support the show by following Serenity and Fire wherever you get your podcasts. And also, be sure to leave a review and share this episode with those you love most. Together, we can empower more people to make more evidence-informed decisions about their health. Until next time, keep seeking to understand your biology, always respect your physiology, never stop asking why, and keep balancing serenity with fire. I'm Krista Guageni, and I'll talk with you more in our next episode. At Panacea Luxury Spa Boutique, we don't just offer traditional spa treatments. We create rituals that relax your mind, restore your health, and rejuvenate your spirit. From biohacking technologies to advanced oncology-trained care, everything we do is designed to help you heal on the deepest level with clean, holistic therapies, products, and amenities that are second to none. And right now, you can experience two of my favorites, our whole body LED light bed or hyperbaric oxygen therapies. And as a thank you for listening, you'll get 10% off your first session when you use the code Serenity10 at booking. What is your panacea? Let us help you find it, because true wellness isn't a quick fix, it's a ritual.